Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Lord of the Flies. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about how to tackle the exam, specifically the Edexcel GCSE Literature Paper 1. It's that 40-mark question that goes alongside the Shakespeare. So I'm going to go through some sort of little predictions for 2023 and then run through how to approach the exam, thinking about what should go in your introduction, how to format your paragraphs and making sure you're hitting those assessment objectives with lots of examples to see you through. So let's get started. Okay, so let's just start by having a little look at all of the essay questions that have come up so far. I've done them just in brief rather than the full questions, but you can see, for example, that in the last couple of years, we haven't had a straight character. Last year we had a group, as in the hunters, and the concept of evil. And the year before that, we had Jack and Ralph combined as a relationship, which is quite a nice question. Everyone was, of course, waiting with bated breath for Roger because, you know, he hadn't come up, and sneaky old Edexcel whacked him in the COVID year. But, you know, I get that. So really, in terms of what has and what hasn't come up, making predictions is tricky because Edexcel have a duty, and all exam boards have a duty, to ensure that they're not predictable. So we're like, yeah, let's make predictions, but the thing that looks obvious is probably not the thing that Edexcel is going to do, because then everyone would prepare for it. So take this slide with a pinch of salt. In terms of characters, we've not had Piggy or Simon on a kind of proper paper yet. You know, we've only had them on specimens. So Piggy and Simon have not been formally examined. So they're definitely characters that I would consider just, you know, having a look at. We've not had Ralph alone since 2017, but we did have a bit of him, you know, the year before last. You know, perhaps Piggy and Simon are more likely, but again, like I said, does them being likely mean that they're not going to be on? It's difficult to tell. Now, in terms of themes, we've had a lot of the dark stuff of late. We've had evil, power, fear, violence, the beast, which is evil, control. So power and control have both come up in the examination, and the kind of dark stuff of evil, fear, violence, beast. Loss of innocence, that was the first year. And again, down here we've had bullying, conflict and society. So nothing has come up as a kind of a victim kind of question, like explore the victims of Lord of the Flies. And that would be interesting because obviously if you've done your Piggy Simon revision, then that just fits in nicely. Obviously we had relationships last year, but you could have something sort of similar to that in the kind of concept of friendship, which would obviously allow you to look at the Ralph-Piggy dynamic. And for something quite interesting, you could look at the Roger-Jack dynamic. But I think the argument would be, well, that's not really a friendship. That's two people using each other for their own benefit. And then another one that hasn't come up in Word is like the concept of savagery. I know it ties in, but it's, you know, in terms of the big concerns of the novel, the notion of from civilization to savagery, that word hasn't come up, even though it's intimated in some of these things here. So it's a little bit of a steer, but you know, when it comes down to it, I would recommend that your revision is nice and broad, and what you're doing is you're looking at quotations that fit, or kind of moments in the novel that fit a wide range. If you start by thinking about revising all of the characters, you'll notice that all of the things that you're revising for the characters are going to fit in to ideas for the themes, obviously. There's one other thing that has never come up, which I've not put on the slide, but it's just popped into my brain. Years ago, AQA had a question on this that said choose 3 symbols and explore their effect, which would be amazing because you'd just go the mask, the fire, the conch, done. But yeah, I think that's quite a nice way of revising the text, is to revise the key symbols and how they link to the characters and the main ideas. If I get time, I'll do a video on it because I do think it's interesting. Any excuse to talk about the mask. Okay, right, so let's now just get into the exam style itself, let's remind ourselves of the basics. As you know, you've got a choice of 2 questions. Those questions can be theme or character or both. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be 1 theme, 1 character, although it has done that a number of times, but you could get 2 characters, you could get 2 themes. It's worth 40 marks, which is whopping. And for that reason, you've got 55 minutes. It's the only Edexcel paper that actually gives you the opportunity to write a proper essay, grumble, grumble. Now, our assessment objectives are key here, because what you're going to see is that you're only being assessed on AO1, 3 and 4 SPAG. There's no AO2. AO2 is, of course, your analysis of language structure and form. So you don't need to go, oh, the metaphor, the simile, the blah, 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 you know, the use of the abstract noun. You don't need to do that. Your essay style is going to be much more discursive, you know, really talking about the key themes, the messages that Golding has, and demonstrating your knowledge of the novel. So AO1, which is worth 16 marks, students should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response. Okay, so don't use slang, answer the question, and then use textual references, including quotations, not or, it says including, to support and illustrate interpretations. So that's worth 16 marks. And then another 16 marks is for context, understanding the relationship between text and the context in which they were written. You want to use your context where it is relevant and appropriate. It doesn't have to be in every single paragraph, but it should be in the majority of them. And I'll talk to you about that more in a moment. And then this is actually a real whopper, 8 marks for SPAG, for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. That's 20%. That is the difference of like 2 to 3 grades in some areas. So for the love of God, check your work, particularly the opening. Try not to make mistakes like punctuation mistakes and spelling mistakes in your opening paragraph, because your examiner will just be like, oh, you know, so check thoroughly as you go. If you're concerned about spelling, punctuation and grammar, guess what? I've got a playlist that takes you through commas, how not to use commas, like comma splicing, using the semicolon, paragraphing, all of those things. So do go and have a little look. That could help. Right, first question. Should I write an intro? Yes. Yes, please. Bearing in mind this essay gives you 55 minutes, it's not like where you've got 25 minutes to write on an extract and any introduction is going to be a sentence long. You are going to write an intro because, 1, it helps you hit the AOs right from word go, and it's going to tell the examiner you know what's what, and you've got a personal response, because your introduction is all about saying, this is how I take the question. I've got some do's and don'ts for you. So do have an angle, yeah? In that introduction, you need to sort of express like the most important thing, you know, the key message surrounding the theme or the character. Just in a sentence or so. It doesn't have, you're not going to eke out of your kind of content for your essay, but your introduction should, without using I statements, basically say to the examiner, this is what to expect. Do include some context, not crazy context, again, a sentence or so. Root it in something really specific and relevant. And if you do those 2 things, that's AO1, AO3. So don't use I statements, don't include quotations unless you're quoting like Golding, like if you were quoting something that he said about, you know, the terrible disease of being human. If you were writing an essay on evil and you said that he's expressing his concerns about the terrible disease of being human, or whatever it is that he said, that's fine, but don't quote the actual book in your introduction, and don't write vaguisms. Simon is an important character because he's central to all of the different things and ideas that happen in the book, and Golding makes him important by writing about him in ways that are important. No, you need to have something to say. This is the kind of thing that I see where my students are being really like earnest, like they're wanting to hit the AOs, but this is what I kind of mean by vaguisms. So let's imagine it's Simon. Golding makes Simon a really important character in the novel. In this essay, I'm going to discuss how Simon is presented through the novel. I will use textual references to support my ideas and refer to context. Well, great. I'm really pleased because that means you're going to hit your assessment objectives, but you're not getting any marks out of that. That's a non-intro. Yeah. Avoid your I statements. I will, I'm going to say this, I'm going to do that. Avoid that. Avoid this vaguism. Yeah. Avoid saying, oh, I'm going to use textual references. Of course you are. You're going to refer to context. Well, do it straight away. Look at this instead. Simon is an integral character to Lord of the Flies because he represents the concept of goodness in a cruel, savage world. Boom. There's my angle. Yeah. So my examiner knows now that this is what the essay is going to be about. I don't need to say, in this essay, I'm going to discuss how he is the concept of good and evil. You don't need to say that. You say it in a bold, declarative statement. Now I'm getting in my little bit of context. In many ways, he is a mouthpiece for Golding himself, as he alone seems to understand the concept of the darkness of man's heart, chief concern of the writer following his experiences of war. Boom. Don't need any more than that. That's fine. That's my intro. I've hit AO1, I've hit AO3. It's technically beautiful, so it's gonna, it's hitting AO4 as well. And now the examiner knows that I mean business. Practice writing introductions for different characters. Now, I've used fairly chunky context in there, but that's because it's Simon. If you got a question on childhood innocence and the loss of childhood innocence, then you might refer to the fact that he was a teacher, or you might refer to the fact that he read Coral Island when he was little and then realised that it wasn't very realistic. You might draw upon a context that is a little bit less punchy, we should say. Right, so let's talk about the main body of the essay. I'm not going to tell you how many paragraphs to write because I don't know. I don't know what writing stamina is like. I don't know what your aims are. I know that the examiners want to see developed responses, and you want to aim for probably 4-ish arguments that might be spread across. You might develop an argument over a couple of paragraphs. So 3 to 4 arguments, but potentially spread over more than one paragraph. Okay, I mean, an examiner should be turning pages in this essay because you've got 55 minutes. But these are the common problems that I see within those paragraphs. Retelling the story, and then Jack says this, and then Piggy says that, and then Ralph chips in. Not enough focus on Golding's intentions, crafting, so actually just not writing about Golding and what he's up to at all. Quotations that aren't that relevant, so just a quote that you remember, but you're not really sure why, but you've put it in. And not quite answering the question. And then for AO3, sometimes we just don't put any context in. And that's 16 marks down the drain. If you just think that's 40% gone. So if you're a kind of like borderline grade 5, grade 6, yeah, and you forget context, you're not going to pass. So, I mean, it's going to be very difficult for even really, really high ability students to pass if they forget context. That's 40%. Okay, or underdeveloped context, or context that's just like tacked on at the end. Now, this is the paragraph kind of format that is mostly used, okay, the Peel paragraph. And I've written ish, I'm going to explain why. And it makes sense. It really makes sense, particularly if you're the kind of person that might forget context. Because if you go Peel, then you're like, oh, what's that? It's my link to context, and it will keep it in your brain. Your point focuses on the question. It's specific. Yeah, it's not just a tie-in to a quote. Your evidence is a quote or detailed textual reference. So that's when you can't remember the quote, so you're going to paraphrase something that happens, but you're still going to do it talking about what Golding's up to. For example, you can't remember the quote, Jack planned his new face, and so you said, this is particularly important in the moment where Golding writes about how Jack plans and crafts a new identity through the mask. Okay, you're not quoting, but it's still quite clear what you're talking about. Then you've got your explanation, where you're going to develop your point further. You're going to relate it out to major themes, like why it's an important moment in relation to either theme, a thematic journey or a character arc, or the way that something has changed. You'll notice that I've said explanation, not analysis, because you do not need to hit AO2. You don't need metaphors and similes for this question for Edexcel. And then our link to context. But it's so important, right, that your context is not forced. Yeah, if you're like, oh, talking about the kind of depravity of Roger's torture of the pig, and then you say, this is because Golding read Coral Island. It's got to be relevant. Okay, here's something I made earlier. By the way, this isn't actual student work. This is just like modelled on the kinds of things that sometimes I see. So Piggy is an outsider in the group. Fair point. It would be better if it said Golding presents Piggy is an outsider. The boys don't like him and bully him, particularly Jack, who seems to hate him from the moment he meets him. Only Ralph likes him, but not at the beginning. Piggy, Piggy, this shows that he isn't liked. All right, okay. If you're writing on Piggy, which is what I'm assuming, then the stuff that you're writing about is relevant, yeah? And this does explain that he's an outsider, but it falls into storytelling. The quote isn't relevant, the explanation is limited, and there's no context, okay? So what about this? Golding shows that Piggy is an outsider. The boys don't like him and bully him all the time. Jack seems to really hate him from the beginning. This is shown when he said, shut up, fatty. But then Ralph told him that they used to call him Piggy, so they bully him, even more. Even Ralph takes part in the bullying. This is because Golding used to be a teacher, so wanted to show mankind's essential illness. All right, so it's better. It's not perfect, but it's better. So we've included Golding in the mix, so that's something. Okay, and this is relevant. We could perhaps use a slightly fancier word than shows, demonstrates, conveys, presents. It's a little storytelling here, but the quote is relevant, as is this one. And there's an attempt to develop the argument, particularly here with Ralph taking part in the bullying. This is what I call the tack-on context. Yeah, this is because Golding used to be a teacher. Okay, yeah, fine. So wanted to show mankind's essential illness. Ew. That's kind of like squeezing two contextual points together. Did Golding really teach boys and think, oh, it's mankind's essential illness? No, that came from his experiences of war. That came later. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he wasn't troubled by seeing the way that children behave in school, but that is a bit of a tack on. So what we want is something a little bit more like this. Golding presents Piggy as an outsider from the opening of the novel. At first he is described as it and the voice, which has a dehumanizing effect and immediately makes him lower in status than the fair boy, who we learn quickly is Ralph. Do you notice how in that first bit, my quotes are literally a matter of words, like 1-word, 2-word phrases, just neatly embedded into the sentence. Here, Golding clearly comments on the way children have social orders through Ralph's disinterest in Piggy and his name. So now I'm developing my point. Now I hit some context. As a school teacher in an all-boys school, Golding would have witnessed the power dynamic in the social groups of children, and so marking Piggy out as lesser prepares the reader for his identity as the victim. So my context is relevant. That's an appropriate place to put the kind of school children teaching context, but it still links back to the text. It develops the point further. This is exacerbated further when Golding presents Ralph as in line with the bullying Jack, confiding that his real name is Piggy after Jack has called him Fatty. This portrayal of Piggy cements him as the other, notably different from the other boys. Okay, this is why in the previous PowerPoint I said peel-ish. Yes, peel does work, but sometimes you don't want to just tack that context on at the end. This is, I suppose, an example of peel-y, because what I've done is I've put in the context, but then I've carried on. I've developed the point further, because it's relevant, because it can be done. I'm not suggesting that you have to do it in that way, but I'm just saying that with that paragraph format, if you stick to peel absolutely bang on, then you could end up with quite sort of formulaic paragraphs with context a little bit tacked on. So don't be frightened of thinking, oh, I'm going to pop it in here and then develop the point from there. That's fine. So final advice. Make sure your topic sentences are specific and use the word Golding. Golding demonstrates, Golding portrays. What is interesting about Golding's depiction of? Golding should be there so that the examiner knows that you understand that he is crafting, that these characters aren't real life. Embed short quotations within paraphrased textual references. So rather than remembering every single quote that was ever, or every single sentence that's ever in the book, have your key quotations, but know where they're from so that you can use detailed paraphrasing without storytelling. Okay, no one can remember every single bit of the book. So just practice using textual reference through paraphrasing as well as quotations and embedding them into your discussion. Do include context regularly, but only when it's appropriate to the point that you are making. Beware of the tack, Be careful of simply retelling the story. This happens and this happens and this happens. You always need to think, but why? What is Golding's message? But why? But, what is significant about this moment? And for 20%, for 8 marks, check your technical accuracy. Do it per paragraph. If you leave it all the way to the end, you're going to be knackered, and your brain just won't pick up on it. But if you do it at the end of every paragraph, so if you write your intro, quick read, and you go, oh, whoops, a comma spliced in the thing, right, change that to a full stop and change that to a capital letter, then it's in your brain, and your next paragraph, you're going to be less likely to comma splice. So, I know in literature, you're not often having to worry about spag, but here, where it's worth 8 marks on this particular question, it's so important. Right, that's it from me. Sorry, that was a lot. I intended that to be a short video. Whoops. Give me a shout if you've got any questions at all. Just pop them in the comments and I will get back to you. I know that the 2023 exam is in a matter of days, so massive good luck. I will post a few more bits and pieces to help with the Edexcel material in the next couple of days, and then obviously for your paper 2 afterwards. That's it from me. Thank you so much. Happy revising.